I would take it out longer than the next decade. I think I love to look at a recent report by the GAO that looked out over 50 years and said that over that time period, state and local governments would be $10 trillion short of what they needed essentially to pay their bills. And most of what was driving that deficit was healthcare costs and an eroding revenue base. So these are challenges, highly predictable challenges that the states are facing, and even though that's a 50-year time period, the things that the states are doing today and for the next decade are going to affect whether they are indeed $10 trillion short. So the kinds of things that states are wrestling with as they implement healthcare reform and they try to figure out how to control costs while still paying attention to healthcare outcomes, those are going to be very important decisions. The kinds of things that states deal with as they look at the demographics that they are facing. We are becoming an older population, and that really changes the kinds of things that states are going to have to be providing in terms of program, the costs that they're going to face. So as states are faced with those changing demographics, they're going to have to make some decisions about how they spend their resources, and that's going to affect the kinds of programs that they can offer, and that's going to affect the lives of every resident of every state.
It's going to be involving money. I call it the politics of austerity. When the Great Recession hit, I remember Scott Pattison, the head of the State Budget Officers Association, saying, "This really is the new normal." I thought, the new normal, that's an interesting phrase. I wonder if that's just sort of overstated. We have recessions all the time. Well, it was. It was the beginning of the new normal. Things are not going to be the same again, at least for a very, very long time, I don't think.
Another challenge that they face, and they're related, is uncertainty in the federal-state relationship. When we see in Washington, at the national level, uncertainty about where the federal government's going, what's going to be done in terms of resolving federal deficit problems, what kinds of budget cuts are likely to happen that affect programs that are managed by the states or are shared jointly by state and federal governments. I think that's going to be the challenge over the next several years.
I think the state-federal relationship is an ever-evolving one, and I think what's interesting about that relationship is I would say right now we are in a particularly interesting window. The recession, so what states and the federal government and localities have dealt with over the last 5 years because of the recession, and what they're likely to deal with over the next at least decade in terms of slow economic growth and continuing to deal with the aftermath of the recession. I think that states and the federal government are going to renegotiate relationship by relationship what the fiscal, how they want to interact with each other. So everything from immigration to transportation to healthcare to education is going to be a topic of intense conversation and policy making in a resource-constrained environment. And things will change. But I don't know that they're always going to change in the same direction.
There's a disturbing trend in Washington in particular, and I think we all know what it is. It's hyper-partisanship. Ideology wins all. It's as if nobody thinks for themselves anymore. And I hate to say it, but I'm beginning to see that creeping down into state capitals. And I call it the Washingtonization of state capitals, and it's not a good thing. There are some places that are able to stay away from it. The voters have just decided to unify government in 30 of the 50 states, which may tell us what could be coming here in Washington, because voters are tired of the parties bickering with each other in Washington and in their state legislatures. And so now they're, governor and both chambers of legislature in the same party. Maybe that will break the deadlock, I really don't know. But this is not an environment in Washington where you can make good policy.
Polarization at the state level has grown. I don't think there's any question about that, but it's nothing like it is in Washington, D.C. Maybe a couple of exceptions to that, but by and large, the states operate, most state legislatures operate on a calendar where certain things have to happen at certain times. You have to adopt a budget, and you have to do it every year. You have a certain number of session days in many of the states. It forces them to come together and take action and not to be able to defer things. Kick the can down the road is a popular phrase today. I don't like it very well, but it is. But the states don't have the ability to do that, which is fortunate, I think, in the way that the national government does. But I think without question there has probably been more polarization. It's inevitable. We see it in the country at large. It's going to be in legislatures as well.
I do see states engaging in really creative, thoughtful, data-driven policy in more and more areas, and you can point to a couple. Corrections, sentencing and corrections is an area where states have done some really remarkable things over the last 5 years. Truly transformative in terms of how they protect public safety, how they hold offenders accountable, and how they really pay attention to the fiscal bottom line that they are dealing with. Corrections costs have skyrocketed across the country over the last decade, and I think more and more we've seen states step up and say, okay, help us understand what kind of a return on investment we are getting for all of the billions of dollars we are spending on prisons and on other kinds of corrections policy. And in many cases, the answer to that question has not been very satisfying, because recidivism rates, the amount of times that people return to prison, have been climbing, as well as costs. So what state policymakers are looking at is how they can get a better return on investment. And there's more data now than there ever has been about what to do, and they are using it. And as a result, they are making decisions that are driving their investments in very productive ways. Crime rates are down, public safety is up, costs are down. It's a terrific outcome, and data has driven a lot of that decision making.
Yeah. Yes, they are. It's going to be more difficult because of lack of resources and so many other issues they have to worry about. But that's a double-edged sword, because a lack of resources can mean that you've got to think differently.
I think states have always been innovators. The traditional way to talk about them is the laboratories of democracy. I think that has been true for decades, and it continues to be true today. It moves from policy area to policy areas, and I think innovation happens in areas where states are often under stress. So where you're seeing a lot of policy making right now is in the area of immigration. It's something states are dealing with. It's something the federal government is struggling with, and there's a lot of policy happening in that area. Fiscal policy, everyone's under stress. Every state is trying to figure out how to do more with less. And I think increasingly states are beginning to look across borders at what other states are doing to learn from innovation that's happening.
Oh, I think so. With the innovation in that, I think that we see the experimentation. Again, look at healthcare. Where did it begin? It began in places like Massachusetts and Vermont and other states experimenting with broadening coverage and attempting to do things like that. If we look at education reform, it's the same thing. It began in the states. The whole system of vouchers and charter schools is state directed. I think absolutely, yes.